Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're looking at a pretty jarring reality of our modern economy, white-collar layoffs, but we're viewing it through a somewhat unexpected lens. We're going to explore how 19th century philosophy, specifically the ideas of Karl Marx and David Hume, might actually hold the key to understanding all this deep unrest in today's corporate world. Let's just get right into it.
We are seeing absolute turbulence in the labor market right now, especially in tech. And it brings up a really fascinating question. Are modern tech layoffs making Karl Marx relevant again? Now, listen, this isn't about predicting the total collapse of capitalism or saying Marx was completely right about everything. It's more about asking if his deepest anxieties, about how a capitalist system treats actual human beings, are suddenly feeling uncomfortably contemporary.
To really get this, we have to look back at the historical context. Back in 1848, Marx and Engels predicted that capitalism would naturally simplify society into two strict opposing classes, the owners and the laborers. But history actually took a totally different path. Western societies stabilized the system. They brought in worker protections, welfare systems, and crucially, they fostered the rise of this massive white-collar middle class. That middle class became capitalism's great shock absorber, sitting right there between the ultra-rich and the working poor.
And this stabilization created what we call the middle-class bargain. It gave millions of folks a real, tangible stake in the whole system. We're talking mortgages, lifelong careers, retirement accounts, and a really strong professional identity. But above all, it was built on this hope that your effort would directly translate into upward mobility. For a long time, this implicit contract made capitalism look not just socially tolerable, but incredibly stable.
But here's the catch. That long-standing middle-class bargain, it is suddenly fracturing. And this intense pressure isn't just coming from one random economic downturn. It is literally coming from two distinct directions at the exact same time, squeezing the white-collar workforce in ways we haven't quite seen before. So let's break down that 1-2 punch. First up, the COVID correction. During a pandemic, tech companies had access to incredibly cheap capital, and they basically convinced themselves that the digital economy had permanently leapfrogged the physical one. So they hired like crazy. Now, with growth normalizing, they're reversing that massive boom. Second, we have this huge shift toward AI expectations. Companies aren't just reacting to weaker demand or higher interest rates, they're restructuring around an anticipated future. They're making deep cuts today based on the expected, though let's be real, sometimes totally unproven efficiency of artificial intelligence tomorrow. And honestly, you just have to listen to the actual language executives are using to justify these moves. Headcount reduction is increasingly talked about as this natural, totally unavoidable consequence of AI. Humans are suddenly described as costs to be optimized or layers to be flattened. Workers are just resources to be redeployed. It's almost like employees are viewed as obstacles getting in the way of funding new strategic obsessions. Things like, and this is a real industry idea, putting data centers in space to capture solar energy and lower latency. It's technologically fascinating, sure, but that kind of language utterly strips the humanity right out of the workforce. And this exact modern sterility brings us right back to a young Karl Marx, specifically his 1844 concept of alienation. Influenced by philosopher Ludwig Feuerbach, Marx theorized that under the intense pressures of capitalism, workers become completely estranged. They get disconnected from the actual work they do, from the products they create, from their colleagues, and ultimately from their own fundamental human essence, or what he called their species being. Marx hit the nail on the head with something that hits incredibly close to home today. Labor is not merely a transaction. It's not just some mechanical way to earn a wage. It is a profound expression of human creativity, sociality, and dignity. When you view work through that specific lens, the absolute spiritual ugliness of how modern layoffs are handled becomes glaringly obvious. Losing a job isn't just losing a paycheck. It's the loss of routine, identity, and belonging. And the way layoffs happen now brilliantly illustrates the dehumanizing aspect of all this. A totally painful human loss gets transformed into this chilling, sterile administrative procedure. Step 1. An employee is unexpectedly dropped into a mass video call or a gray room. Step 2. A legally approved, totally wooden script is read. Step 3. Digital access is instantly cut. The badge just goes dead. And Step 4. They're escorted out by a security guard as if they've committed a crime, with literally zero chance to even say goodbye to their team. Now, you could argue this process is efficient, but man, that is only true in the absolute narrowest sense of the word. Capitalism at its worst completely forgets that underneath all this pressure for procedural efficiency, the core unit you are trying to optimize is an actual human life. You have a person with emotional energy and years of dedicated contribution suddenly treated as a mere risk object that just needs to be contained and neutralized. Corporate logic often pretends that stripping all the emotion out of the firing process is the safest, most rational thing to do. It protects the company from liability and, it makes the spreadsheet math work out faster. But that begs a truly vital question for us. Is ignoring human emotion actually a rational business decision? Or is it just a massive, completely short-sighted miscalculation? To figure that out, let's pivot away from Marx for a second and bring in the 18th century philosopher David Hume. In his treatise of human nature, Hume famously wrote that reason is and ought only to be the slave of the passions. He wasn't saying we should all be totally irrational. Actually, scratch that. It's more like he was pointing out that human beings are fundamentally moved by feeling. Pride, shame, fear, hope, care, that's what drives us. Reason is really just the tool we use to serve those deep-rooted emotions. When you apply Hume's philosophy to the modern workplace, the contrast is literally night and day. The prevailing corporate myth operates on this totally flawed belief that workers are just lines on a spreadsheet temporarily wearing ID cards. But Hume's reality tells us that workers are human beings, deeply moved by their attachments, whose entire lives are structured around the work they do. Hume proves that treating employee emotion as some annoying inconvenience is actually deeply irrational, because it means you totally misunderstand the subject you're dealing with. And this kind of emotional blindness, it has massive real-world business consequences. The true cost of brutal layoffs goes way beyond whatever severance packages are handed out. It completely destroys trust, morale, and a company's broader reputation. It effectively erases the moral legitimacy of the leadership team. And perhaps most importantly, the surviving employees do not suddenly become more loyal just because management acted tough. They just become more afraid. Any short-term cost savings you get are ultimately paid for with heavy long-term cynicism and disengagement. Now, to be perfectly clear here, and we always want to look at this neutrally, jobs really can't always be preserved forever. Businesses fail, markets change, and emerging technologies absolutely alter the amount and type of labor required. Layoffs are sometimes completely justified economic realities. But if a layoff is absolutely necessary, the manner in which it is conducted becomes incredibly paramount. So, what exactly does a humane firing regime look like? Well, there's a pretty clear playbook, and it honestly just comes down to treating people like adults. It requires absolute honesty about the business context without hiding behind weird corporate euphemisms. It means giving them maximum reasonable notice, having private, respectful conversations instead of just dumping people into mass video calls, offering proper severance and transition support, and allowing folks the simple dignity of closure. And crucially, it means skipping those humiliating security escorts unless there is a genuine, documented physical risk. The big takeaway here is pretty profound. Empathy in the corporate world isn't just some nice-to-have, fluffy PR decoration. It is a fundamental, load-bearing pillar of the social bargain that makes a market society bearable and sustainable for the people actually living inside it. When you strip that empathy away just for the sake of hyper-efficiency, the whole foundation really starts to crack. Which leaves us staring down one final, incredibly important question. Can capitalism remain humane while being productive? There's absolutely no doubt the system can produce wealth and efficiency, but as we navigate this wild new era of AI and constant restructuring, companies really must do so with moral seriousness and dignity. Because if they don't, Marx's ghost won't even need to prove that capitalism inevitably collapses. It will be enough to show that, in moments of extreme stress, the system completely forgets the very human beings who made it work in the first place. Think about that the next time you hear someone talking about a restructuring for efficiency. What kind of system are we actually building here? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep asking the hard questions.